Hello, class. Welcome again to Intro to Theater. Today we're going to be discussing a little bit of the play Sapientia by Roswitha of Gandersheim, who is behind me right here. Hey there. Um, so looking at this play, what we're going to do first is a little bit of something called dramaturgy. Now, usually what people think of when they think of analyzing a script is just taking the text itself kind of in isolation and trying to figure out what you can find out about the characters in the situation from what is actually written on the page. What dramaturgy is, it's a way of looking at a script using things that the text itself refers to, or maybe the time period in which it was written, to help inform what is going on in the play. And I'll give you a little bit of an example here. So I think that in this particular play, it is a lot is illuminated by looking at the context of what of the world that this play is in, and also the world that this play depicts as well. The time period that this play takes place in is not the time period in which it's written. So let's look at a little bit of a dramaturgy for Sapientia. So, okay, come on. There we go. I know this might seem a little bit a jarring transition here. So who is this guy? Who is this bald, clean-shaven fellow who this bust represents? This is Galba from 68 to 69 of CE, right? Or yeah, some people call that AD, but we call it CE for the Common Era. He was an emperor of the Roman Empire. He was the first emperor in what is called the Year of the Four Emperors, which you can guess what's coming. His predecessor was Nero, who committed suicide, right? We remember Seneca earlier, right, as an advisor to Nero, who was a famously terrible emperor of Rome. And Galba ruled for, from 68 to 69. His successor, Otho, this, I don't know, ramen-haired, clean-shaven fella, was the second in the Year of the Four Emperors, but he wasn't there for very long. Even though he assassinated Galba, he committed suicide after a rebellion was led by his successor, this guy, Vitellius, the third in the Year of the Four Emperors. He was a general, essentially, of a Roman legion up in what is now Germany. But he was executed by the soldiers of his successor, Vespasian, who was the fourth emperor in the Year of the Four Emperors. Now, anytime that kind of huge political churning is taking place in a short period of time, this is not a time of stability necessarily until you get to Vespasian. Now he was, some things about him. His reputation was military. First and foremost, he did come from an equestrian rather than a senatorial family, which means it was a slightly lower in the class structure in ancient Rome, right? His successor, Titus, was his son, lasted 2 years. Again, clean-shaven, kind of baby-faced fella. Succeeded by Domitian, also a terrible emperor as well. He was assassinated by his advisor, Nerva, and I'm getting to the reason why I'm going through all these, right? So Nerva was the first in what as some have called like the five good emperors. He was able to select his successor, Trajan. Now we're going to stop a little bit at Trajan and talk a little bit about him. Now, Trajan, when you think of the Roman Empire at its greatest extent, you think about the map that Trajan left his successor, right? He was in Roman history. He is certainly one of the top 5 emperors that Romans thought of themselves, possibly even like the top 2, right? He was very well regarded in the time for his administration and his getting along with people. And even though he was an emperor and he could do what he wanted, he was conciliatory toward the Senate and everything like that. He also expanded, right, the boundaries of the Roman Empire to their greatest extent, and the Romans liked conquest, right? And he died of a stroke. Unfortunately, he was deified by the Roman Senate, right? So the Senate voted him to be a god, right? And then he was succeeded by his cousin, Hadrian. Hadrian. Yes, that Hadrian that is in Sapientia is a real person, right? And again, this is Hadrian. he has a beard. Right. All of his previous successors, at least for the last 50 years, um, did not. Right. Now, Roman, especially upper class Roman, uh, like culture, and their own kind of opinion of what themselves and what a good Roman was kind of, hardworking, comes from the country, very civic minded, military minded, duty, family, law, reason, all these kind of a little bit more kind of Spartan utilitarian-ish um, uh, values, right? They did not think of themselves necessarily as having kind of opulence, right? Or things that were lavish. They thought that that was not necessarily Roman, and a little bit more Eastern, right? For them, Greece and way over into Asia Minor, right? What is now kind of the Middle East, Persia, Syria, these sorts of places. And one of the things that the Romans, in the fashion of the time, was to have a relatively clean shaven face, right? Because a beard was associated with the East and was associated with uh, uh, somehow kind of cultural decadence. And now we get to this fella, Hadrian, who has a beard. He was actually known um, by the Senate as they called him the Greekling, because he was very much a fan of ancient Greece and Greek philosophy, Greek theater, Greek culture, even like the Greek pantheon of deities. Right. One of the things that he would do is he would travel around and he would to like Greece, really, and go on these kind of mysterious religious retreats for a long period of time with these kind of little cults, as it were, with his boyfriend, incidentally. From North Africa, they would travel around on like a boat and have all these things. But he was generally regarded as a pretty good emperor too, but he inherited the Roman Empire at its greatest extent, right? This is 117 AD, and you can see that Hadrian took the reins of the Roman Empire at 117. Now, the most famous, when people who don't know not much about Roman history think of Hadrian, one of the things they might think of is Hadrian's Wall, which was a wall that was built way, way up. If you look at Britannia, or what is today England or the United Kingdom, right, way up to the north, essentially on the border between what is today England and Scotland, right? There was a wall that was kind of separating, notionally separating civilization from barbarism, right, beyond. Now, building that wall a little bit implies that you're not going to go further, right? Why build a wall if you're just going to conquer the territory after that the next year? Why? So Hadrian inherits the Roman Empire at its greatest extent, and Hadrian will start to contract a little bit, not as much, but he thought, well, might as well take care of what we have instead. And so he has very big shoes to fill, right? When you think about Trajan, who built the Roman Empire to its greatest extent and was deified by the Senate, everyone thought he was a great guy, the optimal kind of leader. You inherit that, you have a lot of big shoes to fill. And you kind of want to keep things going, right? You kind of want to keep a lot of the policies that made your predecessor very well regarded and respected and powerful. You want to keep those going. And that also is true with Christian policy of the Romans. Now, again, the Christian community was still pretty small at this point, but growing, but still pretty small. Rome as an institution was not, Christians were not emperors yet, right? It was still kind of a smaller, cult, as it were, but a smaller religious community. But Christians do tend to proselytize, right? They share what they think the truth of the world is to try to get more converts. Now, what Trajan did to deal with these pesky Christians trying to recruit people is there is a letter that Trajan wrote to Pliny the Younger, who's like a historian and advisor to him. Trajan said that Christians are not to be sought out. If they are denounced and proved guilty, they are to be punished with this reservation, that whoever denies that he is a Christian and really proves it, that is, by worshiping our gods, shall obtain pardon through repentance. Right? So I kind of think of this as a little bit of a don't ask, don't tell policy, right? Whereas, where whereas the Roman Empire treats the Christians. Um, Christianity is perfectly fine if we don't know about it, kind of, right? But as soon as Christians start trying to recruit and proselytize in the broader community, making trouble, as it were, then it becomes a problem. But I think it's interesting that Trajan's policy was, even if, and again, they're not to be sought out. There's not spy networks going around trying to catch Christians at church. But if they are found and proved guilty, it's like, you are guilty of being a Christian and trying to, proselytize. How dare you? And you're going to be punished, except we will not punish you, and you'll be free to go and free to really, wink, wink, be a Christian on your own time, as long as you just give kind of a nominal, like, okay, yeah, your gods are fine. Roman gods are good, and I'll just go on my way. Right? And so that's kind of the policy that Trajan instituted, and that Hadrian continued. Right now, the play that we read, Sapientia, right, has Hadrian in it. Right, it is extremely unlikely that this sort of scene would actually play out, where the Roman emperor would be sitting in judgment of these people who are found guilty of being Christians and trying to get them himself to, turn their back on their faith. Because Hadrian honestly was too busy for that kind of thing. He wanted to go party. He wanted to go hang out and, go on, retreats, and just kind of let the empire delegate it and run itself. So he probably would not micromanage like this. But the idea of Christians being brought before, Hadrian or representatives of the Roman state to renounce their Christianity to avoid punishment was absolutely a real thing that went on. And so again, it makes sense that Roswitha would be setting this play in that time period. Now, one thing that's interesting about Sapientia, right? It is in the play, and it is textual in the play, that she is from Greece. And Roswitha and the people who would read this play would know this about Hadrian, right? Because they were all, all these early millennia nuns would absolutely know about Roman history, right? Because that's the big empire that came before. So they would know that her being her being Greek would mean something to Hadrian. It would predispose Hadrian to be kind to her. Now, there is no historical figure, advisor to Hadrian named Antiochus, right? That's someone who is made up. Presumably because Antioch is a city in Syria. So even notionally, even further to the east, right? Even further decadent, even further away from kind of Roman virtues than Hadrian was. And so Antiochus, you can kind of look at this play as Hadrian kind of being a little wishy-washy, but Antiochus kind of speaking bad things into his ear to try to get him to be a little bit more firm and more firm and more firm with Sapientia and faith, hope, and charity. Right. Now, one of the reasons that I like this play is that it is very medieval in many ways, right? Not only is there the heavy-handed moralizing, right? There is no question in the play. There is no nuance on whether Sapientia and her daughters are doing the right thing, right? Whether Sapientia is correct in encouraging her daughters to withstand torture and death, and to be eager for her daughters to die, right? So that they could all be together in heaven. There is no question in the play that Roswitha thinks that that is the good thing, that is the right thing to do, right? And this kind of heavy-handed moralizing absolutely is an inheritance from who we talked about a couple of times ago, Terence, right? When we talked about Roman comedy, having this kind of moralizing aspect to it that other tragedies and other comedies, certainly ancient Greek comedies of like Aristophanes, did not have this absolute moralizing. Um, and so it is very medieval in that moralizing. It's medieval in that, right, three of the characters are literally named Faith, Hope, and Charity. And they are frankly pretty interchangeable, to be honest, right? The three daughters are just meant to, they are named these certain virtues, but they're pretty, two-dimensional as far as characters go. There's not a whole lot of depth. There's no point in which they waver or like, well, do we really want to do this? Or even like they have really private conversations among themselves that much. Um, and so when Hadrian executes Faith, he is not just executing a 12-year-old girl, even though he is executing the idea of faith, right? Is the Roman Empire against one of these Christian virtues? Um, and so I like it that it is medieval and the characters are relatively flat. We also saw in some of the morality plays that we talked about that characters would literally be named these virtues and represent them. And that is absolutely in Sapientia here. Another reason why I liked it, it is very, very visual, right? This is not three or four people standing around a kitchen just talking about, their family life. Oh no, right? Some of the some of the scenes in this play are, right, Faith is getting tortured. How? She's trying to be flayed. That doesn't work. He orders her nipples cut off of her breasts, right? And instead of blood gushing out, it is milk that is gushing out. Oh my goodness, that is such medieval and raw and almost kind of savage imagery to put into a play, right? And again, that's not it. That's just daughter number one. Daughter number two is flayed, but as her skin comes off, it fills the air with perfume instead of, I don't know, whatever, like kind of metallic iron or blood, whatever that smells like, but it's perfume that fills the air. And then she gets her head lopped off. And the third one, right? She swims around in this like vat of boiling liquid that this cauldron explodes and kills thousands of legionnaires. Uh, and these this imagery is extremely visual, right? They stick in your mind, knowing, oh my goodness, this is what is going on in the play. Again, it's not just people talking about their cats. It's people getting boiled alive, things exploding, things, people getting their heads chopped off, bleeding, flaying, dismemberment, all this sort of thing. Um, Another thing that I want to point your attention to is that there's no stage directions really in the play. Um, uh, when I talked about closet dramas, right, that this is potentially a closet drama. If you remember, that means that it is a play that was not meant to be performed per se. It was meant to be read by, a whole bunch of people sitting around a circle. And so in the dialogue, people would say, oh my gosh, do you smell that thing? I smell perfume. Or do you hear that sound? It sounds like rushing water, right? Instead of a stage direction that says, there is a sound of rushing water, or that kind of thing. And so that is the reason that scholars think that this may have been a closet drama. Now, one of the, from our modern uh, opinion, looking back, one of the strangest kind of, record scratches in this play, right, is that math section, right? So Hadrian asks Sapientia how old her kids are. And instead of saying, oh, they're these ages, she responds with a math riddle, right? Which is strange, right? This play is not about arithmetic or algebra, or it's not about any of that. So why is there this detour in the middle that, I don't know, explains a math lesson? And scholars do think that one of the reasons why is because Roswitha is a woman, right? And because at the time there was, the big hierarchy was the Roman Catholic Church, well, sorry, was the Catholic Church hierarchy. And that, well, I guess the Catholics weren't there that, but the church hierarchy, well, I guess in the Middle Ages they were, but the big hierarchy was the church hierarchy, and the church hierarchy was extremely sexist in that men were allowed to do so many more things than women were, and women had relatively subservient positions in that hierarchy to men. Right? So oftentimes things that were written by men had their own kind of status that something written by a woman did not uh, was not assumed to have, this kind of authority that women were not assumed to have. And so a lot of scholars say that that Sapientia was written with this math lesson in the middle as a way of Rosvita talking, through Sapientia to Hadrian. It's Rosvita talking to the men who may read this play to say, "Hey, look, I'm smart. I know what I'm talking about," essentially, and trying to give the author, right, more kind of status, as it were, to give her writing this play a little bit more authority. And so I hope that you all enjoyed this play. Oh, one other thing that I wanted to mention, you can see a little bit of echoes of the Greek chorus, right? At the very end with the matrons who kind of gather around and, help Sapientia prepare her children for burial outside of Rome. You can see still that kind of echoes of the chorus of like even Medea's kind of women of Corinth, right? Kind of gathering around Sapientia in the end. And I kind of like that the chorus still persists in ways, and in transformed ways. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this play. I really really like this play. I don't know if I would ever perform it because it is in a way unproducible. Right? With all of the special effects that you would have to have. You could shoot it as a movie. I'm going to put the quiz up, and I hope you all have a good day. All right, and I will talk to you all later.